Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet all of you. My name is John Mugo. I'm the Executive Director of Zizi Afrique Foundation. We work in the education sector, and I have been in this sector for the last 20 years, working on various aspects. And I'm glad now to meet you and share my experience, but also my perspectives on how we could together improve Kenya's education. So I will start by walking you through what I consider the four main issues in Kenya's education. We have an issue on relevance because education has to be adapted to 21st century living. We have an education that falls short of many expectations and which, if not addressed, will be a big impediment for our children and our future generations. We have an issue with quality, the fact that learning outcomes are extremely low, but they are also inequitably low. So they are not low everywhere. They are low for some geographies, and they are low also for some sections of our population. We have an issue with access. Access has expanded, and we have now many more children attending school than any other time in our history. But the main issue is that this lack of access is not equitably shared, again, just like quality. And the last issue I would want to highlight is the issue of inclusion. That if we contribute to an inclusive society, then the gains of education will not be equitably shared. And so inclusion is indeed a big priority, not just for our education, but for our society. Let me get back to myself, because behind every person, there is a story. I don't consider myself an average Kenyan. I think I am extremely privileged. I am where I am today, and I'm able to share with you because of the story of my education. I was born and brought up by parents who never went to school themselves, so I'm a first generation of literacy. And what I remember impacted me a lot, I think, is the space at home. The fact that my parents believed in education, but also that opportunity to work, and this photo that I share here, I really connect with it. That's not me. But when I saw that photo, it just took me years back, how in the fields of Moya Tebere, would herd cows and play and endlessly. And there was a lot of learning from environment, connecting. And the literacy that I now campaign for actually began from reading the environment and getting connected to the environment. I started school with many children, 83 of us in grade 1, but only 2 of us finished on time in 8 years. And so when we talk about the aspects of wastage, grade reputation, I really connect with that. And that's why I say that I'm a survivor of a bad education. I'm a product of the 844 system myself. But when I look at the people that I went to school with, the talents they had and all that, anyone who was not cognitively, intellectually gifted, then never made it. And the fact that I got a scholarship, I think, after excelling in Kenyan education, I think by all standards, going to the public university then, only about 7% of us could make it from secondary school to university. But also finishing in the top 0.something% with the first class honors, got a scholarship. I went to Germany. And I think the movement from the Ndiroku village to the University of Hanover, where I did my master's and PhD, really shaped me. And the fact that even though I started school late, 8 years in grade 1, I got a PhD at the age of 29 years. So this shaped me and my story. And when I say that education could be better, then I think I have various points of reference that I have. So let's deepen a little bit my perspectives around issues on relevance. The aspect of relevance, whether education serves the purpose, is one big question for our education. The fact that we have an examinations-driven system where teachers must now resort to rote learning, drilling children to pass examinations at the expense of the holistic development that every child needs. The fact that there is wastage in terms of talents, but also the fact that key competencies for 21st century living, like social and emotional competencies, talents, life skills, are often overlooked, means that we may lose on a lot of the global competitiveness because our jobs will not be enough. So we are training for our market, but also for other markets out there. We have done a lot of research around youth and employment, and more than half of employers complain that the graduates of our education do not meet the bar in terms of the skills and competencies and attitudes that are required for work. Another aspect is the fact that even though we have competency-based curriculum now, the CBC, and this new curriculum, in my opinion and assessment, is much better than what we have now currently as 844. The fact that it creates space for a child to think, space for a child to thrive, regardless of whether you're academically gifted or socially or sports-wise, or you are in theater and arts. The situation may improve over time, but when you look at the fact that the children now in grade 5 upwards, all the way to Form 4, are not going to benefit from this new curriculum, which means that half of the currently schooling generation are not CBC. And what are we saying about that generation? But also the fact that the system needs to warm up for us to experience the CBC outcomes. The teachers must embrace this attitude-wise. Every teacher must internalize what CBC means, CBC education. Because if a teacher understood this correctly, then they will be able to do the many things on their own without any training. There are opportunities, and this is what I'm calling levers to improve relevance. And we'll come back to this later on what philanthropy could do to improve and contribute to better relevance of our education. Better CBC governance needs to rapidly entrench the instructional principles of 21st century learning. Right now, a relevant education is not one where you walk to class with a notebook and you listen to a teacher for 2 hours taking notes, and then an examination comes, semester end or at the end of the term, and you reproduce. That education no longer works. Knowledge now is available everywhere. Information is available everywhere. And so 21st century learning means preparing children and everyone to be able to seek information for themselves and be able to differentiate the true information and one that is not. That is what I think we could contribute to. Another thing is that we need a new generation of teachers. This shift is not automatic for every teacher. It's not common sense. Because a teacher must then cede power. When I say that I'll walk to class not to teach, but I'll walk to class to learn with the children, to facilitate learning, to question, so that we are able to deepen the conversation. Then we need to do a lot in terms of creating this new generation of teachers, and I think it's a big and very exciting opportunity that teachers understand and believe in the true worth of education, but also that they're able to balance between educating the mind, the heart, and the hand. Because unless if the children now are able to do all these things, they'll not be able to thrive. Parents and communities, of course, must understand the worth of community, holistic learning and be able to contribute to it. But also skills production that is well aligned to demand, and also technology that is not just adopted for learning, but also that our children produce technology. The most unfortunate thing now is that we have an education that trains children to use technology but not to produce it. The next issue is around quality, that less than half of the learners in any random school or classroom will not demonstrate grade level competencies. This is unfortunate because it means whenever a teacher is teaching, then they are teaching less than half of the population. The other half is supposed to be 1 grade or 2 grades or 3 grades behind. Learning outcomes are also extremely inequitable. If you picked a child randomly in Kiambu, in Nyeri, in Nandi, they'll be like more than 10 times able to do a task of grade level than a child in Wajir, in Marsabit, in Turkana. But also a competency-based curriculum might fix this problem, but then there are issues. It will take longer and we are losing a generation that is not learning. There are certain opportunities, and I highlight a few. The fact that we have we could have better CBC governance to do all the things that I explained, and parents that are able to respond rapidly and be able to create spaces for learning, so that the learning power and balance between home and school, now these learning spaces have to come together, because through internet, through technology, then the division becomes really small. The next issue is inequitable access to education. I have highlighted the fact that if we looked at all levels of education, really, access to education has doubled over the last 2 decades. And if you look at TVET, for instance, is one of the biggest beneficiaries. Secondary education, now we have many more children transiting from primary to secondary than we have had in history. And this is laudable for the policies that government has put in place. But we have certain populations that are locked out. If you look, for instance, at arid counties like Samburu, Turkana, and Marsabit, and other places, around that of children either are not enrolled or are enrolled but are not in school on any given day. And so this creates inequities in access that need to be addressed. Children with disabilities, of course, is a big issue. If you look at our per child capitation model, the fact that a child who goes to primary school gets 1,700, the ones going to secondary school get this amount, then that means that money benefits larger schools where they have larger populations. And we know that in the arid north of Kenya and in many other places, populations are really low. But also the fact that the Higher Education Loans Board places students, gives loans based on whether they were centrally placed by COOPs or not, then that excludes those with disabilities, because many of them are not placed through the central placement service, or those in vocational training centers are unable to access loans. And we know yet that those attending vocational training centers are the poorest, are the ones with the less education. They are actually the ones who require the loans more than anyone else. The levers here include access to quality. So that is not just an expansionist education, it's not just plain massification of education, but which might just yield greater frustration when we have so many now youth finishing school, but they can't get jobs or they don't have the skills. So how do we balance between access and quality so that what is being accessed is not just any education, but children and students and youth are accessing education that is of quality? A differentiated funding model, I think, is something to argue for. It is now starting to get into policy that you cannot just give flat rate capitation for every child. We need also a portion of that and including in the formula, so that some of this money goes to bridge the equity that exists, but also leveraging on technology. An example I can give here is that we have had a long history of mobile schools in the northern Kenya. How can we now have these mobile schools of children who follow animals or who have to move from place to place, leveraging on technology so that they can be able to connect to teachers as they look after animals and other such related innovations? And lastly is the aspect of inclusion. The fact that access for children with special needs has expanded, but then through the mainstreaming and integration policies. But then early screening, identification and assessment is still a long way to go. And I can speak about this authoritatively as a council chair of the Kenya Institute of Special Education. We have a long way to go. Most of children attending even special schools have not been professionally assessed. And when they are assessed then too late for meaningful placement. Learning environments need to adapt to difference, looking at removing physical and mobility barriers, removing social and emotional barriers, as well as removing instructional barriers. But also the Kenyan society thrives on difference, whether I'm this tribe or I'm that. How do we change the narrative? And I think this is a big opportunity that we can universalize early assessment. We can have progressive implementation of inclusive education, and we can also contribute to building a more inclusive Kenyan society. So what is the role of philanthropy and what is the role of civil society? I highlight 3 things that I see as opportunities. One is to focus on youth facing extreme adversities so that we're able to bridge equity in both access and quality. And so that we are able to reach those that are farthest behind, and through that be able to disrupt the cycles of marginalization. Coupling support to individual children and system, focusing on individual children and schools and families, but also focusing on the system, because when the system improves, then every child benefits. And then also better integration of evidence to inform investment. I think if investments are led and informed by evidence, research, data, evidence, then we may be able to move faster by adopting what works. Civil society, of course, we need to build greater coalition, empowering parents, producing and sharing knowledge, but also holding government to account. And as Zizi Afrique, our work is based on three things: on evidence generation and learning, advocacy for policy and change and implementation, engaging government, but also testing innovations. And I am really glad that we have this opportunity to interact, and I look forward to receiving questions and interacting with you further, even in the future. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Rupert Corbishley. I work as the Regional Education Early Childhood Development